the story of the company and what it did, I believe what it did to India, what it did for itself anyway in India, and how it happened. And then we'll go through the story until we end up in the middle of the 19th century. And then I have some questions that take it beyond that. The story of the company and what it did, I believe what it did to India, what it did for itself anyway in India, and how it happened. And then we'll go through the story until we end up in the middle of the 19th century. And then I have some questions that take it beyond that. And we'll, of course, have enough room for all of you to chip in with a couple of questions of your own. So let's start, if we may, with the Anarchy. Can you describe for the audience briefly the kind of conditions India was descending into as you describe it in the book?
So if you think about the Mughals from the perspective of a sort of Bollywood movie, the Mughals are all about sort of, pigeons fluttering through marble palaces, mangoes being dropped into the mouth of Jodhbai's mouth and this sort of stuff. But what we always forget is that behind all that money and glitter and wealth lay an astonishing industrial production. As you know very well, Shashi, India produced about 40% of the world's GDP under the Mughals. And that's why, not just the British, but before them, the Portuguese, the Dutch, after them and alongside them, the French, the Danes, and everybody else came here because it was so incredibly rich. And the East India Company starts off, if we could, yes, hang on, if we could move on. This is where the story, in a sense, begins. It looks very English. This is Powis Castle, Tudor box hedges, and so on. But go inside.
Where is Powis Castle?
Powis Castle on the Anglo-Welsh border. But go inside, and you find more Mughal loot than exists in any collection in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, or Afghanistan, sitting in a private house on the Welsh marches. As you walk in, you see Siraj-ud-Dowlah's palanquin sitting there, plundered from the battlefield of Plassey. Through the arch at the back there is Tipu Sultan's campaign tent, seized after the fall of Srirangapatnam. It's all sitting in one private English house. And this is the reason why. As you walk in, you see a picture of a rather large Englishman being handed a document by a rather effete Mughal emperor. And this is a completely fictional picture. It actually happened inside a tent, at the point of a gun, virtually, because the guy in the white, in the red frock coat is Robert Clive. And Robert Clive is the man in whose house all this loot now sits. And what everyone always forgets, I think, in the story was that Clive did not work for the British government. He didn't work for Downing Street, didn't work for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, didn't work for the army. He worked for a private company that existed in this building. And look how small it is. It's just 5 windows wide. It's not even the 2 buildings on either side. The tall ones are not the East India Company. It's just the 5 in the middle. And for the first 100 years of the company, there were only 35 employees.
In London, you mean? 35 in London, but many more in this office. Yeah.
But at the time of Plassey, in clerks, in civil, non-military officials in India, only 250. And the trick that they pulled off, the devious, ruthless, but astonishingly effective trick they pulled off, was to borrow money from Indian bankers, turn Calcutta into a sort of Dubai or Singapore where no one paid any taxes, so all the Marwaris trek over from this part of the world and end up sitting in Calcutta. And then to use that money that they borrow to create an entirely Indian army that was 95% Indian. It's incomprehensible today, particularly in a country which is...
So we were conquered by Indian money and Indian soldiers. Think about that.
It's how did this happen is the story which this book sets out to answer. And it is a sort of extraordinary story. And I mean, I won't go through all of this piece by piece, but just to start the story, it starts off in London, the same year that Shakespeare is writing Hamlet, and about 2 miles away. The Globe Theatre is on the South Bank. Go along to Moorgate Fields, and this man, in September 1999, holds a meeting. And at that meeting, and this is the most extraordinary document, this is sort of thing you don't normally get as historians. It's literally the list of the very first subscriptions put in to fund the startup. This is like anyone here who's planning to do an internet startup or start a small company. You try and get money from backers, and you persuade them that your idea is brilliant. This is that document for the East India Company. What this document started ended in Plassey, ultimately Curzon, and then Gandhi, Nehru, and everything else. Savarkar, we had this morning.
There we are. So the story of a private limited company that went on to take over the world.
If you've enjoyed the conversation that you just heard, do subscribe to our channel for much more.